there, you want to snort? Today we're talking about alcohol. Welcome to the Four Seasons. I'm your host, Ken Johnson, and it's kind of funny when I was thinking of shows to do. One of the things that came upon my mind was talk about the issue of moonshine in America and moonshining culture. And it really did impose upon me some thoughts about how we perceive things. And then I said, no, I've got some real strong opinions. I'm not going to do it. Later that day, a preacher sent me a message and asked me to please do an episode on moonshining. His interest in moonshining in Santa Rosa County. And in Southern culture, whenever somebody that, is kind of religious, is along the same lines as you kind of take it as a sign that maybe if I'm thinking it and somebody else is thinking it, you might want to do the show. So I've thought long and hard about it. I really don't know what I'm going to say on this, so you'll be as surprised as I am with what I come up with. But I think this is just one of those chat sessions. So you see this. If I told you it is apple juice, what would you think of me? If I told you that it was apple juice that was made into wine, what would you think of me? What if I said that it was distilled? How would you see me then? What if I told you it was illegal? Now what would you think of me? That is the case with alcohol in America. Alcohol has been an issue with humanity since really mankind first came up with the idea of getting drunk. The Bible, as much as Sunday sermons, they talk badly about alcohol and the dangers of alcohol, whatever. The Bible is full of it. Noah, first thing he did after floods, he started making wine. We know that Moses drank wine. We know that Jesus, good grief, he drank wine and dealt with wine and referred to wine probably more than just about anybody else in the Bible. And I mean, even when he was dying, one of the last things he wanted was a sip of wine. He didn't want anything doctored up or meant to calm his stomach or meant to alleviate any type of pain, or he just wanted some wine. One of the first miracles he ever did, he made wine. But yet the Bible is full of comments about don't drink to excess. Don't serve your guests overly strong drinks that in an effort to intoxicate them. So there is this morality behind it that it is okay to drink. It is okay to have alcohol. But just have some common sense when you use it. Unfortunately, in America, the church went sideways real quick. And a lot of the sermons that we see, especially with the Protestant faiths, the ministers normally talk about that their father was a drunk and therefore you shouldn't do alcohol. and then they'll give some skewed, out of context Bible verse as explanation. They don't really give a good reason other than fact, I grew up with an alcoholic and I found a Bible verse that could be construed to be against alcohol, so don't do it. And so America, over the years, really went anti-alcohol very quickly. Ironically, one of the first rebellions that George Washington had to quash was distillers. They didn't feel that they should have to pay a tax. And so he wanted to charge a tax, which I really and truly, I kind of side with the distillers. As much as I like George Washington, and that man loved a strong drink, I really do understand where they was coming from, because you think about it, they were revolting against a sales tax that was far less than what we pay today. So, I mean, if the colonials that revolted against Great Britain were alive today, they would be furious at us that we allowed the government tax so much of our money. And then you look at alcohol, it is, back then they didn't have yeast packets and all that stuff. They just got the yeast from the air, which you can harvest wild yeast. And you had abundance of grain that was going to rot. So you had to do something. So they would preserve this abundance of grain and make it into a sellable function. And it made no sense to them. Why am I doing something that basically I waste? Why should I have to pay a tax for something to be kept from spoiling? Why should the government charge me a fee to safeguard my crop and my income? That's wrong. And I kind of see where they're coming from. I understand where George Washington came from, but I disagree with him. I think that there's other ways that he should have done it, but he chose, and that's what happened. Prohibition really changed a lot of stuff, and that was brought on by the church. Churches really screwed up a lot of laws in America. I'm not saying business hasn't. One day I'll do an episode on Heinz, and that man just totally screwed up America. But the churches really did do a lot to mess up America and its laws. And Prohibition was based mostly off of beliefs and really no science. But that's the same way with all drugs and all vices. There's really no science guiding our rules and regulations. And because there's no science, it's just opinion. And so we get some very crappy laws in America based off of opinion and belief. But when Prohibition happened, it devastated this country in ways that we're still feeling in one way or another. It really empowered the federal government more than it should. And so you had legal companies that had to shut down because of a belief. And you had something that was considered to be normal, now made taboo. And as is the case with a lot of American history, whenever you make something taboo, it becomes fun and enjoyable for people to try. So instead of curbing alcohol usage, it increased alcohol usage. And so basically anywhere that the Scottish Irish community settled, you had alcohol. And you had people that were distilling alcohol. My family, they were moonshiners. There was a lot of families in Florida that were moonshiners. And if you had people that were moonshining, that meant that you also had to have runners. And so that meant decked out cars that ran super fast and had hidden compartments. And that's where we get NASCAR from. NASCAR came from the moonshining industry. It was all those guys trying to see who had the fastest car to avoid the law. So it became illegal to make alcohol, or at least distilled alcohol. You could still make some wine, some beer, but even that was kind of frowned upon. And that's where we also got mixed drinks. Mixed drinks were something that the alcohol being produced was so rot gut, so horrible, that you had people that was trying to cut it with other stuff, different fruit juices, bitters, anything in the world to give it a different flavor so you could drink it. And that's the whole reason for the idea of mixing alcohol with some type of mixer. And that's where we get cocktails and all that from, really. So you could go to your doctor, and the doctor could prescribe you some legally produced whiskey. But that stuff was so undrinkable, you really didn't want it. If you lived in a city, you really got garbage. The country people, if we could sell it to the locals, we would sell the good stuff to the cops, to the judges, to the lawyers, to all the big players, the doctors, anybody that had money. We sold them the good stuff, because then we really didn't have to worry about being caught. It was a little easier. And then the garbage was sold to the cities, which goes against the teachings of what public education system says about the cities get the best stuff. That wasn't the case. Alcohol, especially illegal alcohol production, knew no race. You had women producing it, you had men producing it, you had people of all creeds, colors, whatever producing it. It wasn't just Scotch Irish people. So some of the best people in this area were some of the black families. In fact, I know of one family, I won't say their name, but pretty much all the judges, all the lawyers, everybody went to him. And that's how he put his family through school. That's how he clothed them. And a lot of them are major players in my community. And it was because he was a bootlegger. And the term bootlegger just means that you hide it normally in your boot, the alcohol. But he was a bootlegger. He was a moonshiner. The process of moonshine, people talk about moonshiners as being ignorant. And that couldn't be further from the case. If you ever want to learn about moonshining, it requires a setup where you're heating what they call the wash. Sometimes they'll refer to it as beer. It's not beer, but they call it beer. And the reason for that, they heat it up, but they don't want it to boil, because alcohol boils off at a different temperature than water. It boils off at a lot lower temperature than water. And so these moonshiners knew this. And so they would have a fermenter that they would then plug up, and then they'd heat, and then you would have this system where the vapor would be condensed down. And there's different ways. It depends on whether or not you're in Tennessee, Kentucky, Florida. Everybody used a different system. And some people used radiators. out of a vehicle, and so people were getting poisoned because they couldn't get the copper tubing like they needed, or they was trying to do things on the cheap. But people that really did care about producing good stuff, they used quality materials, and you didn't have to worry about it. But death, sickness, poisoning, those were all issues that you had to worry about because the law was so against it. And the real reason towards the end, and the reason why it's still illegal today, is taxes. If you pay your taxes, it's legal. So it's not that it's immoral, that it's wrong, or anything else. And you can even produce small batches, and it's legal. You just cannot produce a certain quantity. And as you know, I'm a mediator. I'm certified with the Supreme Court and the USDA, and I have all these other certifications. And so I cannot do anything illegal, otherwise my career would be shot. So no, this is not illegally produced. But I have done it to the limits of the law and not a drop more. Which it's a small amount that I'm allowed to produce every year. Otherwise, I have to pay the government taxes. If I pay the government taxes, I can produce gallons. And then I have to pay them a certain tax rate, even if I don't sell it, which is asinine to me. That you can produce something, and yet you got to pay a tax for it, basically free stuff. It's just another side of government intrusion, and we've become so used to it that, it is what it is. But at any rate, you have your fermenter. It's heated up. Vapor goes into a condenser. Sometimes they'll have what they call a thumper keg, and it makes a thumping sound. And then eventually it'll start pouring out. Now most people, they think, oh, okay, that's it. That's not it. You have different runs. So what happens if you, the first part is called the heads. And the heads is full of some nasty chemicals. So like a nail polish remover, that's actually produced from distillation. So if you do your nail polish and you need to remove it, a lot of that stuff is created from the distilling process. It's what we call the head. And so a lot of moonshiners would take a spoon, and if they're really smart, which a lot of them are, they learn that as you're pulling off heads, it'll burn red. When you get into what they call the hearts, or the good section, it burns blue. So one good way of doing this is, if you were to do it, is to have a dark area, put a little bit of the stuff that's pouring off, distilling off, put in a spoon, light it. If it burns red, you're still in the heads. You need to get out of the heads, otherwise you'll kill yourself. And so the heads is thrown away. So you got product that is being lost. It's really not lost, it's junk. You can't use it. But you have to use this stuff. Or to get rid of this stuff. So you got lost. So you're paying taxes off of what's the good left after you got so much waste. Again, that's one of the reasons why I hate the tax process in America. But you go ahead, when you get into the hearts, that's the good stuff. And then eventually moisture will start creeping in, because you can't just evenly heat water. It's very hard to evenly heat water. Eventually the water will get to a point that it starts evaporating as well. It's almost impossible to set it at a set temperature, especially when you got a large run, because you got to get the base, your wash, up to a certain temperature, and then you've got to, once that's done, you can't cut it off, because now you got a run going, It's just hard to do. So you get basically vapor coming in. And so when most of the alcohol is gone, then you got water vapor coming in, and that's called tails. And so the tails are added back in for flavoring. And so you have what they call cuts. It's basically quart or pint-sized jars that you fill up, and then you number them, and then you figure out where your hearts start, where your heads start or end. You get rid of all your heads, you keep all your hearts, and then you figure out the taste profile of your tails and how much you're going to add in. So then you make your mix. If you age it, then basically you're getting kind of like a whiskey. If you don't, then that's moonshine, or what they call white dog. And that's the clear stuff. So if you got some, color to it, it's aged. No color, that's just fresh out of the distillation process. And so then you get what they call proofing. Proofing just means that it lights blue flame. And so there is a way that moonshiners do it where they shake it up and then they look at the bubbles. And based off of the bubbles, that tells them whether or not it's 50 proof, 80 proof, 90 proof, 100 proof, whatever. And proof is just basically alcohol content. You take the proof number and divide it by 2. So most alcohol produced in America is going to be anywhere from 80 to 90 proof. So if you say 80 proof, divide that by 2, and you got 40% alcohol. And so that is the amount of alcohol in that distillation, whatever it is, whiskey, rum, whatever. Rum is made off of sugarcane or molasses byproducts. Whiskey is made off of corn, grain. If it's a bourbon, it's got to have a certain percentage of corn versus other grains. And then you got some that are like rye whiskeys, things of that nature, that they're made up of more. And so that's the rough way of explaining all that. And the tails really is where you get all these flavors, because it carries over the flavor of the grains and the yeast and all these other components. Now this is something from America's early heritage. In the wintertime, you could take your beer or wine or whatever and let it freeze and pour off the alcohol. And that was called jacking. And so that is what I made. I made a brandy jack. It's an apple brandy jack. So if you ever heard of Apple Jack cereal, Apple Jack is just where you take either apple and rye, like you're doing a whiskey, or you're taking apple wine and you jack it, which means freeze it. Today, there are distillation companies that they sell jack, but they use a heat process because jacking is not protected by the federal government. So basically, they can call anything jack, and there's no government law that says it has to be frozen. My method, I actually do it frozen. You have a certain amount of water that comes off of it. It is technically not considered by federal law distillation, but it is. So it is not a heat distillation, so the government does not see it the same way. But my whiskey here is around 40% alcohol or 80 proof. It's a brandy because it's made out of wine, and so brandy means burnt wine, so it means aged. So I did put some burnt wood chips in the barrel and let it sit and on that. And it's Jack, so it's an apple brandy Jack. But as I started this, I talked about, what if I told you it was water? What if I told you it was wine? What if I told you it was a distilled whiskey of some sort, or brandy in this case? What if I told you it was illegal? Each of those questions would change how you see me. But yet, nothing changed about me. We need to be careful in this country how we perceive things. A lot of what we do and say and impose upon others is based upon opinion, is based upon belief. It is not based upon facts, science, or any valuable data. And that is dangerous. So, if you look at the history of drugs and alcohol, the one chemical that has killed more Americans than any others has been aspirin. And yet we make alcohol extremely restricted. Other drugs extremely restricted. We arrest people. We destroy lives. We destroy families and futures over beliefs and thoughts and opinions. And that's something we should really seriously consider changing. Every time that we go on a tirade about something, it impacts our culture for several generations. Prohibition didn't last really that long, and yet we still are impacted by it. For instance, when I graduated from graduate school, I wanted to do a meadery, which is honey wine. And I wanted to make all the different types of honey wine. And a person was going to give me $350,000 as a loan to start up my own meadery. By the time the federal government got done with me, that project grew to over $6 million, and I had to have 4 different properties, 4 different businesses, and then I would also have to wait 4 years. That lets you know that the government's not here to help us. Anything but. And that's because we, the people, have grown silent. And we shouldn't. I think I'm going to stop here, because I think that is a lot to consider. If you don't drink, fine. I'm happy for you. And if you do drink, all I ask is you drink in moderation. I don't think that it's anti-Christian. I don't think it's anti-family. There's people that shouldn't drink. If you shouldn't drink, don't drink. And if you're not impacted by it, do as you wish. As long as you don't hurt anybody, I really don't care. But we need to start seeing Americans for people and start evaluating why we think the way we do. Why we do the way we do. We need to be more adult-ish in our decisions. I hope you've enjoyed this little chat. And if you haven't already, please like and subscribe. It's free to subscribe. And also there's a little bell icon. Hit that bell. That'll let you be alerted to new content. And I thank you for watching. And I'll see you next time.